Good evening. I call to order the West Jordan City Council meeting, Committee of the Whole meeting. Tonight is Wednesday, September 20th, 2023. All members of the council are present, with exception of Councilmember Worthen, who will not be joining, who we don't anticipate will be joining us this evening, and then Councilmember Pack, who we anticipate will be here shortly. First item of business we have is, let me scroll back up, information on impact fee study and analysis for the utilities. And I believe Fred Philpott's going to be the one presenting this one, or Denise, Becky, are one of you starting? See Greg standing up. All right, we'll just start right into it with Fred then. Hit the button on the right.
Okay. Sorry, I was talking with Corbin, and I was under the impression there was going to be some citizen comment or something like that. So
nope, not tonight.
Not tonight. So caught me a little off guard. Thank you again for having me. It's great to be back to discuss the utilities. This is basically part 2 of the impact fee discussion. A little more complexity on stormwater, wastewater, and water. More moving parts in some respects. But I have condensed the presentation since we've already laid some of the groundwork relative to the methodology and process for impact fees in general. If you'll jump to the next slide, I kept in here the requirements of having an impact fee facilities plan and impact fee analysis. We're complying with statute relative to those documents, and our document that we've prepared serves as a joint impact fee facilities plan and impact fee analysis for the 3 services. On the next slide, just as a reminder, the process was the same for these reports and services as was presented as part of the Parks and Public Safety impact fees. Here we're at a work session in preparation for a public hearing. On the next slide, you may recall these 6 elements that we discussed previously that are applicable to all impact fees. Determining demand, looking at existing facilities, establishing a level of service, identifying excess capacity and future facilities necessary to serve growth, consideration of revenue sources, both past and future. And then again, all of that feeds into the proportionate share analysis with the calculation of the fee. On the next couple of slides, I'm going to detail the specific elements for those requirements as it relates to the utilities. Again, I've summarized those, so it's pretty high level, but if you have specific questions relative to each of the services or relative to impact fees in general, just let me know and I can dive into that. Sorry, jump back one more. I wanted to point out that the service area for each of the utilities is slightly different. So in the Parks and Recreation, the Public Safety, it was a citywide service area coterminous with the municipal boundaries. For stormwater, wastewater, and water, there are some differences. The boundary isn't specific to the municipal boundaries, although it's pretty close. There are some other service providers that serve some of the areas of the city, but the majority of the city is within the impact fee service area. The demand variable for the utilities is also different. Here we're looking at flows, so wastewater flows and water utilization, as well as impervious area and the runoff associated with the impervious area as a result of storm events. The level of service is gallons per day per ERC. noticing a little typo there. I'll fix. It's not GPDO per ERC, gallons per day per ERC, and then a storm event runoff. So we look at specific 10-year, 100-year events and the associated impacts on the system. On the next slide, here I summarized the components of the existing facilities and the future facilities that were included for each of the utilities. There is a buy-in contemplated for stormwater, wastewater collection and treatment, and the water distribution system. And that buy-in component is calculated based on the capacity of the system, and can we quantify that capacity and show the ability to include that infrastructure. Where we don't have capacity in the existing system, then we exclude that buy-in component. In addition to that buy-in, each of the services includes a future facility component, which is really the primary driver of the impact fee and the increase that I'll show you on the next couple of slides. But we are including future stormwater, IFFP costs, wastewater, and water costs relative to those systems. Alrighty, on the next slide, this is now the summary information relative to the actual calculation of the fee. So for stormwater, we're taking the total cost, looking at what's attributed to growth, and based on that allocation of cost, we look at the future demand served. In this case, the master planning process looked at total acreage based on the service area, and then that is converted into impervious acres based on assumptions relative to percent impervious, so we can calculate the fee based on impervious area. So this table illustrates how we get to the cost per acre based on the cost assumptions, and then we calculate the impervious area to get the cost per impervious acre. That is then applied to the land uses in the second table that have different assumptions relative to impervious area per acre, so that we can get that cost per acre to compare to your current fee study. In this case, the impact fee is actually going down relative to your current fee study. So based on the service area and the infrastructure that is contemplated, we are showing a decrease for this fee. You'll notice that the percentage decrease isn't uniform, and that has to do with the assumptions, the updated assumptions in the current master plan relative to impervious area, and making some corrections relative to that in this study. So that's why there's some differences there. On the next slide, that presents the wastewater impact fee calculation. Yeah,
I've got a question on this then. Go back, will you? Just on, so I can see that we're making some assumptions on single family, the percentage of impervious. Does the code, and Greg's smiling, he probably think where I'm going now. What happens if the developer decides or can figure out how to reduce the impervious square footage, and it reduces it in a substantial way? Can they reduce the impact fees because of that?
The impact fee enactment or ordinance that you will adopt includes language that allows any developer to present information that may suggest an alternative fee than what the schedule presented in these documents or that is included in your ordinance suggests. So they can present that information, and staff and you as a legislative body can, if it comes to you for decision making, that is part of the process for any developer. Now, you don't have to take that information and implement that. That could lead to a challenge if they believe that their information is accurate and should result in a different fee. But all of that is baked into the process and allows for a developer to present information that could suggest a different fee.
Okay. Thank you.
Greg, maybe you can answer this one. So we're going down on that. I don't know what the last impact fee, what what this study showed and stuff. But in my mind, that is perhaps because now we require them to retain water on their site. Is that what's playing into this? What's playing into these calculations?
Fred can back me up here, but typically when you do a new impact fee, you look at the projects that are in front of you in the schedule, what's needed to provide for the future.
Mhm.
And the fee is based upon the culmination of all of those projects.
But
So-
is that because we now require them to retain it on their property as opposed to it used to just go down the gutter to wherever?
No,
No.
yes, no, and yes. So yes, because when we did the new storm drain impact fee, some of our facilities got to shrink in size because of some of the stuff that you're talking about. So yes, but no, in that the costs are the costs for the future projects that we're going to be constructing.
Yeah,
Am I saying that right?
yeah, there's really two variables that he's highlighting, which are level of service issues, which that's what you're alluding to, which is the change in retention or detention on site. And those specifically relative to storm have affected many communities across the state because of those requirements for development to retain and detain more runoff. So that cost is shifting from a cost borne by the city to a cost borne by the developer, and impact fees are reflecting that. So that's one variable. But then it's important to note that impact fees will fluctuate from year to year based on the change in capital costs and what's considered growth related. So if an impact fee shifts more towards buy-in because we're not constructing infrastructure as much, that's going to have a tendency to potentially pull the impact fee down over time versus an impact fee that's based on future infrastructure and inflated costs. So I think what he's suggesting and what's part of this study is both of those are affecting this analysis and resulting in the change that was shown.
Thank you.
I just want to make sure that in addition to whatever's happening on site, we're still considering the shared infrastructure. For example, if you've got a large shopping center like a Walmart or something that's going to open up, they may be retaining a whole lot of that water on site, but there's still all the roads and everything that leads to it. I mean, if we're further out west, they're going to have to build those roads. Are those shared elements also considered in the impact fee, and were they included?
Well, the road component, meaning the runoff associated with the roads, or
Runoff that hits the road, the gutter, and then ends up going in there, not just on one person's property, but shared property leading to some of the other sites.
Can I answer one of those questions
Yeah,
first, Fred, before you do? So just stormwater's different, a little bit different than all the others. So let me talk about it for just a second. So there are two different things what we're concerned about. And again, Fred, if I say something wrong, just
push the button.
right, push the button. There is water that is retained on site. We do ask people to retain water on site, but they're still releasing the same amount, just at a different time to the city. So while they're holding on site for smaller storms, the amount in a larger storm is the same that they're giving to the city. So our facilities really are still about the same size. And the areas like a Walmart that are really dense and have a lot of impervious surface, they create a lot of water. They store it on their site for a very small amount of time. So the reason why a Walmart might pay more than a residential subdivision is they generate more excess runoff that goes into the city system that, well, I don't put it in a pipe for a very long time in our basins, which probably make up the majority of that storm drain fee. The cost to build a basin is like $2 million, right? And then that's not even including property. That water gets stored again for another day or so in one of our facilities. So the water generated, say, at the new Home Depot at 78th and 56, that water will be stored on site, generated on site, so it won't go into the ground. It will actually be in the pavement, go into a pond, and then into a pipe and into the city system. That will come down 78 South and go into a pond that is just west of Target. That big pond by the airport and west of Target will hold that water for a whole day and release it really slow to the Jordan River. So that's why, say, a Target might have a higher impact fee than, say, a small home, is because the water generated on those impervious surfaces eventually get released to the city system. And because we can only give it in small doses to the Jordan River, we have to hold it. That costs us a lot of money to build those facilities to hold it again off their site so that people aren't driving through it and whatnot. So does that kind of answer your question, Chris, as far as why would a Target may pay more than like a residential subdivision?
No, my question was more, if you've got this large development that's out there in the middle of nowhere, we also have to build a road to get out to it. And is the impact fee for that going to help cover the road and that shared infrastructure, or is it only looking, is there an element for that in the equation for the shared infrastructure?
The roadway infrastructure will likely be covered in a transportation impact fee, and the answer should be yes. We haven't gone down the road. We haven't done the transportation impact fee yet.
Okay.
But that it should be yes. And similar to storm drain, the answer is yes, that the master planning process looks at the cumulative impact of assumptions regarding development across the service area and the impact on your infrastructure. And then that cumulative impact is then apportioned to the demand variable within the service area, and they receive a fair share of that cost, which includes that maybe external impact. You've got your development impact that is specific to their development, but there's all the system-wide impacts that the impact fee is really intended to cover.
Exactly. And where I was going was flashing back to prior conversations where we had somebody come and say, I shouldn't have to pay anything for stormwater because I'm retaining all of the water on my site. I'm not discharging any of that into the city. Well, maybe not on your property, but there's still shared infrastructure. So that fee helps cover everything else that you use. So that's the stormwater fee, though. That's where I brought up the question with, well, what about the impact fee?
Yes.
And if that's in transportation, that would make sense. So that answers my question. Thank you.
Yeah, and as it relates to storm, that the requirements to detain and retain influences obviously the capacity of the system, but there still is that impact of release, that water does get released. But we have had some development based on data that they provide may still petition to say, hey, we don't believe we're impacting your system, and here's why. And your ordinance allows for that dialogue to happen. So if there's merit behind that discussion, then we can consider it and make an adjustment.
Have the conversation.
Yes, exactly. And yes, it's facilitates the conversation, but you don't have to take action necessarily. Alrighty, so relative to wastewater, as again I mentioned, here we have buy-in relative to collection and treatment. You can see that as the first two rows in the calculation of the fee per gallon per day. Then we bring in the future facility cost and some professional expense. That produces the cost per gallon per day of $10.25, and then we apply that to the level of service per equivalent residential connection. See a question before
I just want to make sure that I'm clear. The professional expense is what's allowed under code to pass it on so we can continue updating these things a lot more often than we have since 2016.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
So the statute allows for the inclusion of engineering related fees, professional expense to go through this process. So the calculated fee per equivalent residential connection is $3,495. That's a 77% increase from your prior fee. We then apply that to the meter sizes up to a 6-inch meter, and you can see based on that schedule the increase. Here we have some changes to the ERC multiplier based on AWWA standards and updates to that, and so you can see the percentage is slightly different, but your typical 3/4 inch meter showing that 77% increase, which the majority of meters across the system fall within that category.
So I'm going to ask a really stupid question. I know this is the standard, but it seems to me that a 3/4 inch pipe, the multiplier would be about 2 to go to a 1.5. Why is it? Why would they make that substantial jump from like 1 to 1.67 for only a 1/4 of an inch jump in the pipe?
It has to do with both the circumference or the the actual capacity and the pressure that's able to go through those meters. So it's not an equal multiplier based on those variables for both the pipe diameter and the pressure that can go through that type of pipe. So hence the multipliers, the changes there.
Just a quick reality check. Was it the water fees where we said we're not going to differentiate based on the meter size? We didn't do that same thing for stormwater.
Stormwater doesn't have
On the
meter.
water utility bill. We used to have a differentiation.
Oh, are you talking like
For
base rate?
for the base rate
Oh, yeah.
between 3/4 and 1 inch. I thought we did away with that there. Okay. Do we have a different impact fee on water for 3/4 versus 1 inch?
This schedule suggests that, yes.
Okay. Thanks. Is that something that can be requested at construction? The different meter size? Well, I guess I'm thinking residential. There's no difference residential versus commercial.
Yeah, the meter size is standard, but are you meaning the meter would be?
Sorry, we
identified?
can go on. We can go on. Thanks.
Okay.
Wait, so I'm a little bit confused. But so what we're proposing is the impact fee for wastewater based on the size of the meter they have
For water.
Yes.
for water.
Yes, but the level of service is relative to the wastewater level of service. So we use the ratios from the meter size to determine the impact fee, but the base fee per ERC is not based on the water level of service. It's based on the level of service relative to wastewater.
Okay.
We use the ratios there to keep consistency based on meter size ratios.
I think it also helps them set demand.
Yes.
So
Okay.
that's why they're using that, is they know how much per demand and they're using the water. I think they're also using the water meter size because that helps with demand. That helps know how much the business is expecting to put in the system. So I think that's why they're doing that. Thanks, Chris. All right. But anyway, that's the meter size. And even though I know this is sewer, it's water comes in and then it's got to go out the sewer. So they have to have a way to gauge the demand. So that's why they're using the water meter size for sewer.
And that's where I was going, because we're hitting them both on the wastewater side and on the sewer side for the same thing that in residential they may not have the ability to dictate. However, in commercial, that's a different case.
And so what you're saying is the demand for the sewer is really the volume of the sewer pipe, not what's going into South Valley Regional Facility. So, because they just charge us how much water ever goes in, right?
So we're having to estimate this demand for an impact fee. When we talk about the treatment plant, they charge us based on gallons per day, million gallons per day, right? The actual there. But we have to do something to estimate what the demand could be from a single family household, because this is really just us trying to estimate that demand.
Okay.
But and what I want to just point out is while we're using water meter size, it's specific. The demand is specific to the sewer system, the wastewater system, and the next slide will show the impact fee for the water system, which is specific to the demand for water. So we can jump to that slide. Here, again, as I mentioned, we have a distribution buy-in, but we're focused on future source storage and transmission projects. Again, we have the professional expense and the ERC served here, producing a cost per ERC of $6,608. We use the same multipliers and produce the fees shown here in the second table, with the 3/4 inch going up by 163%, going from $2,514 up to $6,608. And you can see the increase corresponding to the larger meter sizes there. So for both wastewater and water, here we're really dealing with, as we mentioned before, changes in level of service and the corresponding changes in capital cost, as well as dealing with substantial inflationary changes relative to costs on the side of these projects. So bigger percentages here, but not outside of what we're seeing in other communities relative to this type of infrastructure for water and sewer. We're experiencing substantial capital cost increases, and here there isn't as much of that project improvement versus system improvement that you may see in the storm system, where some of that cost is borne by the developer as a project improvement. These wastewater and water are typically system-wide and have to be borne through the impact fee process rather than that developer versus non-developer relationship. So that's why you're another reason why you're seeing some bigger percentage increases on these utilities versus the storm. The next slide highlights process. So we've scheduled the public hearing for next week. Noticing has been completed for all of that. Obviously, as we discussed in our previous work session, if there's a desire in any way to postpone that, then we can do that. But we scheduled the public hearing to ensure that you have the option to move forward quickly if you so choose to do that. At the public hearing, you're able to adopt, modify, or reject the impact fees. Any modification is lower, so we're presenting that ceiling for the impact fees. You can adopt something lower. And then there's a 90-day wait period before any increase is effective for all of the services that we've discussed in the previous work session and this work session. Alrighty, any further questions regarding data, details, methodology?
Yeah, okay, I guess I got a question. And this is probably silly, and I could probably Google it and probably check it out myself, but since you're here,
Yeah, why not?
the impervious area for residential, you said 50%. I assume that calculation is roughly the rooftop plus the driveway, generally speaking, is roughly 50%. But isn't the rooftop go into the rain gutter, which comes down and flows out onto the grass
It could.
in most houses? I mean, every house I've lived in, anyway.
Yes, it it could, but I'm not exactly sure how the master plan would have addressed that.
Zach, let me explain that. During a large event, you're right. During a small event, you may not even see that get to the street, but during a large event, you're going to see water go into the ground, but also then go onto the street and cross it. So really, when we're talking about storm drain impact fees, we're talking about the 100-year event that really drives that capital facilities plan, because those are the events we're trying to keep the floods out. And on a 100-year event, I'm not worried about how much is going into the grass because it's just all pouring down.
Right. And
So,
well, in that case, it's almost 100% impervious in that case.
right. Well, there's still some, right? But that's why it's so high with even the 50, right? Is because at that point we're seeing a lot of runoff. So we're talking about these large, either the 10-year event or the 100-year event as being what's really driving those costs, not
not the average quarter-inch, half-inch rainy day.
Where it goes from the house onto the lawn and just
my flower bed. It's
right into your flower bed, right? But that's what we're really talking about, is those really large events.
Yeah, thanks.
That was a good question, though, Zach.
Question for you, please, so in reading your great 30-page expose, thank you for all of the detail.
Yeah.
So if this is a 10-year projection and you're projecting a 25% build out of the remaining vacant land on the west side, correct? Within that 10-year period, you're estimating approximately 1,000. So it's basically 1,000 acre feet more from right now to 10 years from now. So just curious how that projection was made, because we go through boom cycles of development and then we have recession. I'm just curious, was this a conservative estimate? Every 10 years it seems we have a big housing boom, and which of course brings in other big rooftops like a Home Depot or a Target or a Walmart. So just curious how conservative this is.
It's definitely linear. We're not trying to predict that cycle of boom and bust. So we're looking historically and doing more average growth based on perceived build out. With that said, the impact fee is proportionate relative to the demand. So if you experience a more robust growth, you're going to collect more impact fees and burn through your capital infrastructure more rapidly and necessitate an impact fee update sooner. So that's some of the protection relative to a proportionate share calculation. Similarly, if you slow down, the assumptions may last a little longer because our capacity in the system is going to serve us for more years or more months than what we projected originally. It's not a perfect equation, but that's really what you're watching for. Is are we going through more growth? Is it much more robust than what is suggested in the studies? Then that would trigger an update sooner rather than later. We should jump on those reports and update them.
Great, thank you. Well, it makes sense, now having done this for a while, why we need to project how much water we need, and by that there could be a dearth or a surplus, but then we pay for the actual wastewater. Be interesting to do even more cost analysis on reclaiming that runoff water instead of releasing it into the Jordan River and doing something with it like we've done at Veterans Memorial Park in the past with non-culinary versus stormwater versus wastewater. But obviously that requires infrastructure as well. So
I think you've also, that's a very good question. I think that you also have pointed out the problems with having an impact fee study when you don't update it on a regular basis. You fall into the problem of your planning projections get worse and worse the longer you go.
Very good. Thank you.
Just to respond to Councilmember Pack, I think we did look at what we could potentially do with some of the stormwater 10, 11 years ago. And we ran into issues with water rights. The city did not acquire the rights for that water, and somebody else did, if I recall right.
So Chris is is right on point with that. Water rights are really, really important in this state, and they're fought over quite heavily. As anecdotally, the water you put into the sewer system still doesn't belong to the city of West Jordan. It doesn't belong to South Valley Water. It actually belongs to the original right holder. So even though you buy water from Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District through the city, it's their water all the way till it gets to the river. And so there's all these concerns when you deal with water rights. That's a very hotly debated topic. That's why when we talked about LID, you can't even have rain barrels of a certain size without running into water right problems.
Yeah,
I remember that happening.
Or registering if you collect so much water.
Sure.
I just wanted to say thank you for your explanation, because reading the homework and trying to piece everything together and then listening to your explanations helped some light bulbs go off. So I just want to say I appreciate your explaining how you explained it.
No problem. Thank you.
So that there's no confusion for the staff, I'm going to move that this agenda item be moved out of the committee to the council meeting on September 27th, 2023 for public hearing and further consideration without modifying the report.
Second.
Cindy, do you need that motion reread, or you got it?
I can copy it and send it to you.
I'll re-listen to it, but I think I got the gist.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Thank you. Thanks. Next up, public infrastructure districts. Denise.
My favorite topic.
Council, it's been a while since we've talked PIDs and LIDs and all of the other acronyms. It doesn't feel like it's been as long as it has been, but you actually adopted your PID policy in 2020. It's crazy that it's been 3 full years, almost to a month. So we are going to talk a little bit about the PID policy, refresh you a little bit on it, because we are going to be bringing a governing document to you for your review on October 11th. So can we go to the next slide real quick? Okay, we're going to go through the process that you adopted with your policy. You know that legislation in 2019 was passed, SB 228. That's where you can find all of the parameters that the legislature has on public infrastructure districts. The policy document is what you as a council adopted, and that kind of outlined how a petitioner could come to the city, the process that they'd go through, and the limitations that you as a council wanted to set on that petition overall. We have received a petition from Wood Ranch or Third Cadence for the Wood Ranch area. We received it at the end of end of July, and we've been working with them on a regular basis as a review petition review committee or design review committee. And that committee has been made up of Jamie and Corbin, Scott Langford, myself, and Josh Chandler. We have gone through their petition. They were meticulous at that petition and did a great job of putting that together. We have been meeting with Third Cadence for a few years since the policy was adopted, not regularly, but they would come back to us and say, hey, what about this? And we'd say, oh, I don't know. Well, I don't know how comfortable we are about that. And so over the last 2 years, we've met with them regularly and really given them some things that we would suggest, and they've come back to us, and now they have something that we feel very good about giving you as a council. Next step in this process is the governing document. So that's the document that we are asking the council, so it's Gilmore and Bell, whom we use also as our bond counsel. They have written the governing document with input from Third Cadence and the city. So that governing document is what we will be bringing to you. That's actually the parameters that they will actually operate under. So that's something that you can set whatever kind of limitations, geographical location, performance measures that you see fit in that governing document. And in the governing document, there'll also be an exhibit that we will call the interlocal agreement. That will be the legislative authority that you are giving to create the PID, and it is a legal and binding contract at that point that can't be changed without your approval. Okay, so that's the process that you adopted in 2020 with your policy and with the legislature. Next slide. Some of the definitions that you're gonna see and are in your policy, as well as you're gonna see in the governing document. We're just gonna review them real quick. Public infrastructure. That's our basic structures and facilities based on zones and demands. It's streets and our utility systems. It's the things that developers need to build and give to the city as developer contributions. Okay. Publicly dedicated amenities. Public infrastructure can also be like a water tank if we need them to, or other infrastructure as well. Okay, so anything that we are going to own that we would normally own. Publicly dedicated amenities is not considered public infrastructure, but it is also dedicated to the city, and that would be open space, improved parks, trails, signage, street lights, street furniture like the park benches, things that we're going to own, we're going to maintain unless we have an agreement with the HOA, but it isn't particularly a street or a utility system of any type. And then public enhancements, this is where we are very different in our PID policy. We worked hard as a council to come up with a way to incentivize these PIDs to really bring something new and different to our city. And so unique enhancements are the difference between what's required from the developer and what they are going to do in addition to. So they might do much better parks. They might do wider streets. They might do larger park strips, more landscaping, more trees, those kinds of things. Those are unique enhancements that will bring added value to the city in keeping property tax rates in those communities a little higher because the value on those homes or businesses should be higher based on the amenities. And then the last definition is mill levy. That's just such an old term, and I wish we could kind of get away from it. But mill levy is the property tax rate. And council, you suggested a mill levy rate of 4 for residential areas and 15, which is a legislative maximum for commercial areas. A mill levy is defined as $1 for every $1,000 of assessed value. That means the whole value. So when you say discount that residential by 45%, that mill levy is actually a little bit lower. Does that make sense? Next slide. All right, so what your current policy that you adopted in August of 2020, I just went over those mill levy limits that you put in that policy. You said that you would be comfortable issuing debt up to 30 years or the useful life of the enhancement, whatever it is that they're using to secure the debt limit. And just as a reference, a home valued at about $675,000, which is kind of a mid-level home in one of these communities, would have, if they were to have a property tax at 4 mills, it would be $1,400 a year or $124 a month, which is similar to an HOA fee for a lot of areas as well. The levy is not subject to truth in taxation. That's an important component that you need to remember. And it's based on the debt service requirements. So if the debt service requirement is $1 million a year, and 4 mills doesn't get them $1 million a year, they're going to put that tax rate at 4 mills and get as much as they can for up to that $1 million. If they have $1 million debt service requirement and 4 mills will bring in 1.2 million, then the levy will be pushed down. It will only be what is the debt service requirement for that year for the debt that was issued. What is it?
I had a question, but just a clarification, really. And that was, you mentioned, I wasn't going to say anything, but you mentioned that $124 a month is roughly equivalent to like an HOA fee, which is valid, but an HOA then also can restrict who gets to use things, and this is going to be city infrastructure, which means it's open to everybody, even those who aren't paying for it.
You are correct.
Okay.
Absolutely. Similar to Daybreak. I mean, people that live in Daybreak pay an HOA fee, but the parks are open to anybody that wants to use the park.
Yeah. Well, to a degree, there pays for some things that are only for Daybreak residents too, but there are some things that have signs that say,
yes,
not for you, keep out. Kind of a thing. But yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. I guess the proximity is the premium that you're getting.
Absolutely, the living in that community. Yeah. Participation is based on assessed value. So, if you've got a higher assessed home, then you're participating at a higher level until you hit the maximum. The first residents will have the highest contribution or the longest participation, right? The first people to move in.
Sorry,
You're fine.
I hadn't thought about that before, and it just sort of clicked. You may be getting the same value of service from a water tank or a trail, but because your home's valued more, you're going to be paying more for that same amenity, even though you don't get to use it anymore.
Yep.
It just clicked. Okay, thanks.
Yep. Which is why you will like what's coming up in a minute more. The debt is limited to the value. So, council, this is something that's very unique to our city. We are saying they would not be allowed to issue debt in excess of the value of the unique enhancements in that community. Okay. Doesn't mean that debt might be used for those unique enhancements. It actually can't be. So if they're building larger park strips, but they're going to maintain the park strips, then the debt can't actually be used to build those park strips. The debt would be used for something that they are going to hand over to the city to be maintained by the city. So they could be using this debt, which likely will happen anytime you have a PID. They'll issue the debt right up front because that's going to be the least expensive debt they can ever use, right? It's less expensive than their own cash because they can invest it at a higher rate, less expensive than capital venture money. So tax exempt debt will always be their first use. So they will be putting in their water lines with it, their roads with it, their sewer lines with it, all those kinds of things, right? That will be how that debt will be used first. But the amount of debt that they're going to be allowed to get at that tax exempt rate will be limited by the value of the unique enhancements. So it's two different buckets. Everybody got it? Okay, next slide. That's your current policy. The Ridge proposal is going to come to you on October 11th. Here's some of the parameters. It will be a 10 to 15 year build out with 240 to 340 units a year. The improvements that they will be giving the city will be parks, roads, sidewalks, lanes. Lanes are alleyways. So they're going to be similar to what you see in Daybreak, which are the back entrance garages, so that we maintain the streetscape without a garage on the front. Street lights and utilities. The improvements that they're going to be putting in that are listed above are about $100 million. The value of the unique enhancements that they've identified that we have verified as a committee is about $51 million. Thank you. The debt issuance they're asking for to start on that $100 million of improvements is $45 million. So they are below the unique enhancement value, and they're also below the value of the improvements. They're asking for $45 million net proceeds. The actual debt issuance will be about $60 million because they're going to do what they call capitalized interest, or CAPI. Capitalized interest is like when you get a credit card and you pay interest only for the first couple of years and then you start paying principal. So in essence, you're borrowing on your interest, right? So they'll be borrowing $60 million. They will have CAPI for 5 years. So their first 5 years of payments while they're building that first phase will be nothing. It will be included in the debt that they've issued. And then their debt service payments will kick in after their assessments kick in. They've been very conservative in their term. They're asking for a 20-year debt issuance. Again, that's well less than the 30 years that's in your policy. Now, this is the different part, and I think it's the part you'll like the most. Their repayment source will not be property taxes. You will not be handing them taxing authority. Their governing document says, I believe 6 times in different places, that they do not have any authority to authorize a property tax in any way. They're going to do what they call an assessment model. An assessment model means that when the property changes hands through sale, that an assessment will be placed on that property. I kind of use the example of when you buy solar panels. You put solar panels on your home and it's $20,000 investment. You may be paying that off yourself because you were the ones that put it on. But if you sell your home, that assessment either needs to be paid off in full to transfer to the new owner, or the new owner has the ability to say, well, it has to be paid off and they'll put it into their mortgage, right? So they can either pay cash for it, or you pay cash for it, or they put it in their mortgage, but it always has to be paid off. That's similar to what this kind of assessment would be. So what they're saying is that it will never have a line on the property tax bill that will say, this is your assessment. It will not be based on property value, and it will not be a moving target, so that the first ones participating will be participating at a higher level because they've been there longer. It will be the same value for all the homes, and they will all be buying in at the same level. Go to the next slide. I can't remember if I put this in there. Yes. All right. So an assessment means no property tax levy will be requested. The assessment model is usually based on the lot size. It does not matter what home is built on that lot size, but it will be assessed on a lot size. So they'll have, I believe, 5 different assessments in the project right now. It's equalizing participation of the owners, which makes it a much fairer distribution of the debt. The average assessment based on the debt structure is $43,000. Now, at first I was like, holy cow, how are you going to make this work, right? I mean, somebody comes in to buy a house and it's a $625,000 house, and then you say, well, and we have to add $43,000 of an assessment on there, right? That can be substantial, especially with interest rates where they are right now. The response is that they know their market, first of all, and that the entire amount of the debt will not be carried by the assessment. It will be a shared carry between the developer and the new owners. So they may have a $43,000 obligation per lot, so to speak, but the developer may choose to take on $25,000 of that and then pass on 17,000 of it to the new buyer. So they're going to have to determine what that assessment is, but no matter what, there'll be $43,000 per lot as an assessment for the debt repayment on this. Does that make sense? So assessments can be shared between the developer and the buyer, and they have not determined that, nor will they determine that until they get much further into this and see what is the housing market doing, what kind of homes are being built, those kinds of things. The amount will be disclosed to the buyer at contract or deposit. So the minute someone puts earnest money on a lot or has a contract to build a home, this assessment will be disclosed to them, whatever the amount might be at that point. So no buyer will go into it with eyes closed and then all of a sudden at closing go, oh my gosh, this is not what I expected at all. Buyer will be able to choose two options, and they've asked this of us because tax exempt debt, this tax exempt debt can probably be issued at about 6% interest right now. They're trying to get to market as quickly as possible before the feds increase rates again. But right now, it can be issued at about 6 to 6.5%. Well, we know that a mortgage is right now is 7 or more, and it will likely be more in time. So if you get to a place where you're saying, I take this assessment and roll it into my mortgage at 7 or 8%, or I choose to make annual payments to the district over 20 years and I take advantage of the tax exempt rate. Does that make sense? So they can do two options. They can roll it in their mortgage, pay it off, and then they're paying it on their mortgage, or the district maintains itself as a district and they pay it directly to the district on an annual or monthly basis. And the district is responsible for that, but it's not put on the property tax bill. Any questions about that?
Are we the district? Will we be the ones doing? Who is going to be billing them?
The district will not be involved with the city whatsoever. You are creating another governing body.
And who will be on
Separate
that
from us.
governing body?
At this time, it will be
We
all the
also are
developers.
different governing bodies.
Yeah.
It won't be us in another name, right?
No, absolutely not. It will be the developers at this point, and then there will be a plan in the governing document. So after so many lots are sold, then one of the seats on the governing body will become one of the residents, right?
So kind
So
of like
kinda like
Dave
an HOA.
Wright's HOA.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly. This is not something that the city really needs to be involved with. So the buyer can choose their type of financing, and then the assessment revenue is used. So everything they collect every year will be used to redeem the debt. So in their best interest, it's to redeem the debt. So if someone rolls it into their mortgage, they take that $43,000 or whatever, and they pay off the debt for that piece. So all of the debt is redeemable annually. Next slide. All right, so our review committee recommendation, we are letting the council know right now in this work session that Wood Ranch or the third cadence request meets all of the requirements for consideration under our current policy. There's no mill levy, so it meets that requirement of less than 4 mills. The unique enhancement value is $51 million. The debt issuance request is $45 million, and the term is less than your 30 years, which is 20 years. We have given it a green light to move forward to you on October 11th, and then it will be in your capable hands. Next slide. Now, what we don't want to happen is this question to stand in the way of Wood Ranch. They are trying to get to market by the end of the calendar year if possible. So we're asking the council to consider the third cadence PID under your current policy. But when we wrote our policy originally, assessments weren't a thing. No one had really thought of this yet. And it's a wonderful way to create a PID. It's a great way to do it. So it keeps us out of the property tax. It keeps us out of all of it. It's really great. So we would like to begin the policy amendment to include the assessment model. We think that there are lots of things and may provide more solutions for some of our infrastructure funding problems that we have, particularly with water tanks, that could be maybe overcome with some new PIT creative PID options if we open up the policy a bit to include assessments. So I would like to do that with the council following or in tandem with the review of the third cadence PID.
Councilmember Jacob, Councilmember Pack, then Councilmember Green.
Thanks. I'm just wondering what discretion we have at this point. I'm considering the council set a parameters in place. They built within those parameters, yet we still get to say yay or nay. Planning commission doesn't get that, it's quasi judicial. It's just, does this meet the parameters that you set? Vote yes or no. It either does or it doesn't, right? Is it a legislative decision, or is it, we can say no just because we don't like the color shirt somebody's wearing when they come in and present on it or whatever?
The legislation leaves it open to the exclusive discretion of the city to decide whether they want to enter into or provide this governing body authority. That said, if it's met all of the requirements, it would not bode well for us legislatively for us to really say no just because.
Well, I would wonder if judicially, forget about legislative or executive, let's just say judicially, if we create ourselves a problem by saying, yes, you met all the code, but I still don't like it, no.
Yeah.
For whatever reason.
I would not know judicially. I'm not a judge, but I would say that it probably isn't
I see
very
Josh reaching for his microphone.
ingenuous.
So I would just reiterate what Denise has said already, and that the code does provide broad discretion to the city. Obviously, there are certain illegal grounds for discrimination that we wouldn't be able to rely on for it, but other than that, our discretion is very broad.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I remember discussing this 3 years ago when COVID was hitting, and as usual, it seems like in an effort to address certain issues and trying to solve them, it could inherently cause others. Kind of with every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, a pro and a con with an HOA versus a PID. So this could still potentially provide a tax deduction if someone decides to roll their PID fee and assessment into their mortgage, and then they can get that mortgage deduction, depending on if they want to roll the dice with a fixed loan at a certain rate that might be lower than the going rate for the mortgage. So it's still very interesting to have first people in paying more as opposed to a set fee that everyone shares at the same level with an HOA. And I was going to bring up the same comment that Councilmember Jacob mentioned on access. When you have the HOA, it is limited, but there could be some potential neighborly conflicts when people are using an amenity that other people aren't paying for. But I guess we address that situation as it may come. It's nice to know that the city isn't going to be a board, because I know that we're striving to get off of the special district board, but it is city maintained, correct? That the city would maintain all of this, so there's still the public perception that the city's somewhat in charge. But it's nice not to have a double property tax on there. With the idea that the developer may decide at the developer's discretion to pass along a portion of the fee to the buyer, that creates a situation where it might be harder to qualify for loans if you're upside down on equity. I understand the whole analogy with the solar panel idea, where it does increase the value of the home to a certain extent, but at the same time, if the equity isn't there, it makes it harder to buy and sell. So just a lot of thoughts to articulate and consider. I appreciate your presentation. Hard to believe it's been 3 years.
I think that you're right. Your comment on participation under the property tax model, you're right. The participation isn't as equalized under the assessment model. It equalizes itself, and that's kind of a nice component of this.
Thank you.
When we talk about the assessment model, if we're going to amend the PID policy, the assessment model could also be like I've seen what Harriman has talked about, that at the time that the building is constructed, and it's almost like an additional building permit fee, that's still the assessment, correct? So if we adopt an assessment, what we're saying is that it's either that it could be, if we amend so what I'm asking is, if we amended the PID policy, we could still leave the mill levy in, if somebody wanted to choose to use a mill levy, what we're talking about, because when we originally did the PID policy, we were the first people in the state to do it. And nobody had heard of the assessment model. What we're doing is expanding our PID policy to say we can use mill levies or we can use assessments to create the public. And then I'll just reiterate, remember what we're talking about is public infrastructure. And so the money is being used on public infrastructure with those enhancements. So that's what we're really saying is that we'd be expanding to say mill levy or another medium that we can get that they would be able to have the person in the district pay back the money.
You are correct.
Okay.
Yes, we would be adding an option A and an option B.
So I'm guessing you kind of need to know where we stand before we leave tonight, right?
I don't really need, it would be nice to know so that I can, I've already written an amended PID policy to include an assessment so we could move this pretty quickly through. I will be putting on the agenda the October 11th, the third cadence under the current policy, but I'd like to put a work session together maybe in October or November that we could walk through an amendment to the PID policy, because I do think there's some really great options for us there.
I'd like to do that before I pass something for third cadence.
That's where we were a little concerned. We reviewed third cadence under our current policy. We'd like to continue them through the process under the current policy because it meets all of the parameters. They would also not want to have it held up as we tried to review and amend the PID policy overall. So we would like to do the third cadence governing document review under the current policy, but also come back to you and say, let's start some discussions on creating an additional option in our current PID policy with new information that we have.
Why do we need to do that if it already works? Why do we need to add to a policy if they can already do it?
That would be true. But as we've explored it and as we've sat together, not with third cadence particularly, but with our team, we've gone, oh my goodness, if we added this assessment model to our policy, what if it were a large commercial development and they want to do, a scalping plant or a water treatment plant, all kinds of options that we could have them put the assessment model on. Or there were a lot of things that we were like, oh, we could use this for infrastructure. There's a lot of creative options available under the assessment model. Third cadence isn't using. Theirs is crystal clear. But as we sat and said, what about, we thought that there were some options that may give the council a lot more tools in their tool belt to allow development for public infrastructure to occur in a more cost-effective way for some of the developments we'd like to incentivize to come into the city.
Okay.
If I may, counsel, just in short, as Denise explained earlier, the assessment model wasn't on our radar at all when we created the original PID policy. We like it enough. We may want to consider it as a tool to allow greater flexibility. Right now, on the mill levy use of a PID, they have to use unique enhancements above and beyond what's required in the zoning to match the valuation of the PID or the valuation of the debt on the PID. That was because we didn't want a property tax line item out there and homeowners to say, what's this property tax for? Well, it's for basic infrastructure. Well, my neighbor doesn't have that and they get the same basic infrastructure. That was a real underlying thing. If you're going to have another line item on your property tax, we better be able to point to something and say, you're paying more in property taxes because you get those enhancements and those enhancements and those enhancements. With the assessment model on a PID, because it's not on the property tax, we may want to consider its use more broadly. But we don't know. It needs lots of discussion. The Wood Ranch proposal does fit under the current policy, so we do need to proceed, want to proceed with that one. If you say, let's just put the PID policy amendment aside, we don't want to open that door up any more broadly than it is right now, totally fine. We can wait and see how it goes with Wood Ranch.
From my perspective, I'd like to open up the PID discussion, because I think there may be ways, and this particularly goes on the commercial side of the development, right? And that's why we allowed the 15 mil levy, is that businesses get really creative with tax exempt bonds and financing and everything else. The reason why I like and to look at this is that they're taking the money, putting it into public infrastructure, and we have no risk. The risk is on the developer and the bond and everything else, and there's nothing with the city that if they go bankrupt, it's not on us, right? And so the more that I've looked at PIDs, I like the ability and the flexibility that if somebody came in and said, look, we're going to build a water tank, and that's part because they need it, I'm good with that. And let that, and if they want to figure out how to pay for it, whether it's on property tax or whether it's an assessment model, they're going to build that into their cost of doing business. And either way we do it, it's probably going to be beneficial to the city and them, because they're not going to do it. You know, businesses don't do anything if they can't make some money, or, well, they might fail, but you know, that's where I'm at with that. So I'm wondering, and so that we can provide you some clear direction, I'm going to move to say the council would like to proceed with the discussions on amending the PID policy.
I don't see anybody shaking their head in opposition.
Is it a motion that needs a second?
Okay.
So it needs a second.
Okay, I will move forward with putting a work session together for you to amend the PID policy and include assessments.
Okay, considering that motion just kind of evaporated into
I
thin
know, I
air.
don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, but I'll just chime in. I'm in favor of reviewing it as well. I really don't like the property tax model. So adding in more options besides the property tax model, like actually writing them in to the policy to maybe spur some creative thinking, I think is a good idea. So I'm definitely willing to look at it and to dive in a little deeper. I mean, I just really don't like the property tax model. I think it's a little bit unfair to ask for part of the city to pay for everybody's infrastructure. So that's just the way I look at it.
Okay, we'll let the motion die. And obviously then that means that we don't care whether we amend this or not. So thank you. All right.
Okay.
So Denise right now does not have any clear direction on which way to proceed. So the question is, and that's why I moved it, so that Denise had clear direction on whether we wanted to have an amended discussion. It died for a lack of a second. That means that we don't want to have any further discussions. Is that correct?
No, I don't think that's correct. Traditionally, we've been less formal during the work sessions, but
We follow Robert's Rules of Order.
we're following Robert's rules, but I then cut off my response. We have a modified Robert's rules, and if the majority of the council likes to proceed, I feel that we can. I didn't hear anybody speak in opposition, so I'm anticipating that we'll see this in a work session in October.
I'm just going to jump in, and modified Robert's Rules is the actual modified Robert's Rules of Order book, not what we make it up to be. So just keep that in mind.
All right, so next item is the transportation updates. Mr. Clegg.
Thanks, Council, Chair and Council. We wanted to bring this up to you folks. As you can see, the 90th South widening project is under construction right now. Moving forward, they are installing, you should have received a map of what's currently there as far as walls in your packet. There's two sections that they are currently installing. They've dug the foundations, are currently installing the CMU wall. We are proposing, with the other CMU walls that are already in place, we would like to move forward with keeping the walls as they are, refurbishing the existing walls. And then there's a couple properties that we'll have to go in and add CMU wall frontages, so it'll only be a 4-foot wall. And then using some of the money that you guys previously funded last year, and do some additional landscaping to the entrance on the north side. In your packet, you'll see also a map of the betterments that we paid for as far as landscaping and how far it goes. Mostly it's on the south side. There's nothing really happening on the north side due to the overhead power that's there. Hence why precast walls would be tough to put in that section also, because they have to be craned in. So we just wanted to get some feedback on how you guys want to proceed with this, so we can start the process and moving forward.
So I'm just going to say it here, I'm very disappointed that this did not become a consistent wall. I'm very frustrated about that, but I do have a question, because in our code for a masonry wall, they need to have pillars 20 feet apart with caps, and the pillars need to extend at least 3 inches from the surface. Is that what UDOT is planning on doing?
No.
How can UDOT get away with not following our code? I don't understand that. In every other city, they get good results. What's the deal?
Like we've talked before, their function is to move traffic. This is their standard wall that they put in. Previously, when we were in design, walls were not even discussed, because everything was happening, all the widening was happening on the south side, and that's all frontage. So when we got the construction plans back, it showed that they were putting CMU walls in. I reached out to UDOT and asked, hey, can we stop this? We need to talk about this. They said, no, the plans were already in. It's too late. We're moving forward.
I just want people to know I'm not happy about this. I think this is a big mistake for our city. We've lost an opportunity, and I think there's a missing piece, because in every other city, they seem to be able to work with UDOT for betterments. And we had a betterment come to us for the 8600 South Bridge, asking about that. So to me, it's odd that we didn't even get that opportunity. But I appreciate your work, Brian. And yeah, we have to, I guess, make lemonade out of lemons and do the best that we can. But it's a missed opportunity.
Right. Any other comments, questions? All right.
So proceed as we're going now. There's no changes. Are you guys okay with?
Doesn't look like we have a choice, do we?
We do have choices. It's ripping down all the existing CMU wall and replacing it with maybe precast. I don't know if any contractors would put precast in because of the power lines.
Yeah,
So
our hands are tied, it seems.
Taylorsville has precast walls under power lines. Somehow it's possible. They've been doing it in their city. So I don't know how they do it, but I've seen it.
If I may, I don't think there's, I think you do have discretion in how, obviously this money is outside of the UDOT project specifically. And so you do have some discretion as to the landscaping and some of the amenities that we can put in along the corridor. And I would anticipate that we would get with, for example, a landscape architect, the area that Brian has identified, we work with them in coming up with a design that we anticipate would also include a gateway sign. So an attractive sign welcoming individuals to West Jordan. And we will bring that to you for your review and feedback. So as related to spending the limited amount of resources that we have set aside for the north side, I think there is discretion from Brian and my perspective and our team's perspective. I think we can maximize the use of those dollars with landscaping. And given what Brian has outlined in terms of the work that UDOT is doing, I think we still can have an attractive corridor. I just don't think we can have a corridor that has uniform walls from the river bottoms all the way up to 1300 West.
I mean, in a perfect world, or even in this world, we can do whatever we want. I mean, we can rip out all the fences and replace them all with, yellow brick road, whatever we want to do, that we're willing to pay to do, that we're willing to go out and take all the necessary, we can do whatever we want. It's a matter of what are we willing to pay for. If we're missing an opportunity, maybe it's missing an opportunity to tap into some other resources, but no ship is ever permanently sailed as far as this goes. So if we're willing to kick in, and I think city beautification and arterial betterments is something that I'm actually willing to look at find ways to pay for some things. This might be one of those ways. I don't know that this particular wall was high on my priority list, but okay, let's, if it is, if that's what the council thinks, and we want to look at this specific wall, we can do whatever we want to do. Let's not be misled in thinking that, golly gee, we're just stuck with this, because we're not. We can do what we want to do.
We did allocate $500,000 for betterments for this wall. That's what Brian's coming back to say. Yeah. We didn't get the wall that we thought we were going to get. So do you want to do these other things? So that's, yeah, we already did say we wanted to do it.
So we did set aside $500,000 for particular improvements. Councilmember Whitelock is correct, including walls along the corridor. Right now, the cost of a UDOT constructed wall in this project is $325 a linear foot.
That's for CMU. That's just the block wall that they're.
So it's an expensive improvement, and part of the question is, given the resources that we have set aside, what is the best value that we can gain from the $500,000? Is it the wall? And clearly we need more than $500,000 to complete the CMU wall at $325 a linear foot, or is it in landscaping improvements that we believe can still improve the aesthetics of the area, but it can't do everything that we had initially anticipated or hoped.
Right. So the question now is,
I was going to say I'd like a little more clarity then on the ask of the council, because the slide doesn't really share what that ask is, but in the request for council action, it does call out that the 500,000 was allocated. UDOT's already planning on going and is proposing that we spend that on additional landscaping, design, city entrance sign, and electrical at about 350,000. And then refurbishing costs for replacing caps, regrouting, replacing broken block, and graffiti treatment is 125 to 150. So there's about the 500,000 that's out there. But Jamie, now you're saying it's a greater number than that?
No, what I'm suggesting is if we were to replace all of the wall from the river bottoms to 13th West, to totally match, we would exceed that 500,000 and require more just for the CMU masonry work. And we couldn't do the added landscaping that we've outlined in the proposal. We could not do the gateway sign or any of the other improvements that we've identified on the north side. We have betterments that we've agreed to and we've paid for on the south side of 90th South, and those betterments and improvements are still in process and will go into place.
So the original allocation from council was 500 grand, which we anticipated would go to UDOT, and that would take care of that. Since that didn't happen, you're asking.
No. We've already, the betterments, the landscaping betterments, the streetlight betterments, the sewer, upgrade betterment is separate from this. You guys allocated an additional 500,000 for the walls. Yeah.
So the 500,000 for the walls was going to go to them to take care of this.
No, we're
we
doing
gonna
the
do that
project.
ourselves. Okay.
Yeah, it's gonna be managed in-house.
Now it's being suggested though to reroute that to do the sign,
Convert some of it to do the
landscaping.
landscaping on that berm, and
Okay.
because there's nothing there right now, and we didn't add that as a betterment because of the cost. We can do it. We feel we can have it done cheaper than what the betterment costs are.
Go back to the last slide. What you're suggesting, let's get down to where the rubber meets the road. What you're suggesting is with the $500,000 is just to put the CMU wall in the green section on this particular map, leave the 600 feet of precast wall, the existing, leave it alone, do a little bit with the yellow to bring it up to where it looks, and then so just spend what you're suggesting is leave a little bit of money for the 300 foot on the current CMU wall, do the 100 foot of the 4 feet that the houses that front 90th South, leave the 600 feet alone and shift that money to the berm between the side of the hill there from Viscerelli's property to the west.
Exactly.
Correct.
Thank you. That
Do we
helps
have that
tremendously.
written down clearly somewhere?
What's that?
Do we have that written down clearly somewhere?
Now we do.
It's in the
Sounds like Cindy got it.
It's in the council action
Yeah, it's
packet.
Where in there? Yeah, I'm looking at the RCA.
Yeah.
We're asking
Under
to
the
allocate
fiscal
funding
note.
be used for refurbishing existing walls to add additional landscaping to the entryway of the city on 90th South.
Yeah, no, this is just like almost anything else, right? We've set aside a certain budget. That budget's not going to pay for what we thought it would. So now we got to decide if we want to add more budget, if we want to take that budget and maybe reallocate it a different way that might have a better impact than what we originally had planned for. That's the decision that's facing us. We're not necessarily, pardon the pun, we're not necessarily up against a wall. We're dealing with reality. That happens especially in years where we have double-digit inflation for a couple years in a row. That kind of thing is going to happen more often than not. Frankly, I think Mexico should pay for it. Any wall that we build should be Mexican. Never mind.
Yeah, I like the clarity with which Councilmember Green kind of summed it up. I didn't see that same clarity in what was provided, so I just want to make sure that if that's the direction that we want to go, that's clear. And I'm assuming that if the council does want to go this direction, that would result in a budget amendment coming back for formal approval.
Yeah, we can put it out to bid to see what the cost would be for precast and CMU, and we could change everything, but we're going to need more money.
Council, I would need to ask the question of our finance director as to whether or not a budget amendment is necessary, because the money has been budgeted already, the $500,000 for improvements along 90th South. I am just unsure as to the specificity of, was that money specifically included exclusively for walls, and we need to amend the language in the light item, but the money is already there.
The theory, so here's my thought. UDOT's going to put the CMU in, right?
Correct.
And unfortunately, UDOT doesn't have to follow city code to do anything. They're going to put the CMU all in. And so we have a decision whether or not we want to put 600 feet of precast wall and change that to CMU. But really what it boils down to is, do we want it to at $325 a square foot, if my math is right, that puts it closer to $1.8 million instead of the 500,000. Is my math right, Jamie? Okay, so what we're getting down to where the rubber meets the road, where the tat strip is in the middle of the road. The question is, do we come up with another $1.3 million to make that precast wall match the rest of the CMU along 90th South, or do we just put in 100 feet of CMU to match the first that first stretch of UDOT? We have that 600 feet that's different, and we shift the money over to landscaping the berm and an entrance sign. That's really what we're talking about. Is do we want to come up with an extra 1.3 million to put in the fence, or do we want to shift that money and use 300,000 of that to landscape the rest of the property coming into the city with the sign? That's where we're going?
Yes, sir.
Just realize though, if we rip out this precast stuff, CMU is actually a lower grade wall.
Right.
And you might have the residents.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the exact. We'd be spending $1.3 million to make the wall match with the worse material wall than the precast.
Correct.
Yeah,
A lower grade. Yes.
with a lower grade.
Anything we do is contingent upon UDOT's approval because it's in their right of way.
Of course. So
we need to ask them if they're okay with our code.
I would.
Clearly they're not.
If I may, Councilmember Green is correct. UDOT is, they will represent that their responsibilities are not to individual codes of respective cities that they work in. They will work with standards that are set statewide. And
Could you show me where in other cities they've put up this cinder block wall?
yes, I can.
Okay.
I mean, I don't
see
have that. I don't have that here right now, but there are situations where some communities, for example, have been involved in betterment type projects where they've made improvements, and some of those improvements have included walls or street lights like we are doing, plantings, lighting along corridors.
Okay.
But yes, we've actually had this. We're actually having this conversation right now with UDOT on a number of facilities that are in the city, and what is UDOT's obligation to maintain and operate some of those facilities, and even if they're constructing them up to the standards that are initially outlined in the plans that they provide us. We're having some of those challenges where UDOT has a set of specifications that they're supposed to build to, and they're not building to them, and we're trying to hold them accountable to build to them, and they're saying, well, this is what you got. We believe it meets specification. So that's an ongoing conversation that we and other cities are having with UDOT. But as Brian said, their primary focus is as the Department of Transportation. They are moving people, building concrete.
I wish they'd move us
asphalt.
better than they're failing at moving people, in my opinion. But I have a question, Brian. Would it be possible to stain all of that a consistent color?
You could tint it. Yes.
I would like to see what
We
that
could
would
look into that
cost,
option.
because that at least would give it some uniformity.
Yeah,
You're talking on the CMU wall, right?
I'm talking the precast, the CMU, the whole.
Oh, okay. So we could look into that. The sections that UDOT are currently putting in right now, they're just putting on. I've told them to put on just the clear graffiti.
Anti-graffiti or
anti-graffiti
Stuff that helps us last longer.
Yes, the sealant.
Yeah. Well, I would appreciate knowing if we could at least give it some consistency. And I think if we could stain it and then put a sealant on, it would give it a consistent look.
Along the whole stretch, correct? Everything.
Yeah.
Correct, along the whole stretch, and then doing what you've already suggested with the plants and other things like that to beautify with the sign. And I'm in favor of that.
like Councilmember Whitelock suggested, I was kind of imagining, would we be able to skim it and then kind of retexture all of them?
I'm not sure. I'll have to talk to a contractor on that. I'm not sure.
If we skim it though, they've done that in my neighborhood and then it cracks.
Sometimes it
And
works.
so I don't know.
It doesn't.
Yeah. I think if we
need
could
to-
stain it, it would.
would help cover some of it.
Whatever our options are, we'd love to see.
I'll look into the staining options and see what we can do with different contractors.
Frankly, if we have to cut costs out of this thing, where I'd prefer to cut in order to make it better looking would be taking out the sign. I don't need a welcome to West Jordan sign if I have it look really nice. You know, that's
I like that. We could print one in our own print shop, right? Welcome to West Jordan.
hang a banner out there. I don't know. Maybe some coroplast 18 by 24 inch. No.
I don't want to allocate. I don't know, you know, I guess we could dip into reserves, but I'm not sure for that 600 feet of precast wall that it's worth $1.3 million more than what we've allocated to put a worse wall in. I really don't.
Lower quality.
That's what I mean. Lower quality. Put a lower quality wall in. I think we need to leave that. Personally, I think we need to leave that wall there. So I don't have any problems with looking at the tent if that's an option that you can look at. I don't have a problem with that. Looking at that, but that side of that road that comes up, that berm, if you will, it's not very pretty right now. And
It looks better now than it has for a long time. It's all just dirt.
Yeah, they've dug the foundations for the CMU wall, so it's all piles of dirt right now. All the weeds.
but you know that and I wouldn't even care if we even go a little bit farther east to the fence line, to another couple hundred, another 40 or 50, whatever that is, to the east along that little strip, even a little bit farther.
The other areas we could look at is in front of everything else is being landscaped on the north side up to the Rocky Mountain Power. And then it goes up. There's a section between Rocky Mountain Power and the mosque that we want to look at too, to see what we can do there.
And then from the road and then what we're talking about here with this 15,220 square feet is that from the east edge of that green shaded line to the mosque fence. That's
we can, but that's not UDOT right away. That's the property owner there. That's why we stopped it right there. We'd have to get right away from him. I'm saying it can't happen, but I don't know if we luck in the past.
Well, we may be able to negotiate. Just say, can we landscape it? It's on your property. I mean, I think it's something. I mean, here's my thought. UDOT landscapes it all the way up to Rocky Mountain Power, right? And then we got a little section by the mosque that we're looking at. And then we're going to have another little section of land from the landowner. And we're going to have this section that everybody's going to drive through the city and say, WTH, over. They're going to say that. So if we can negotiate with, and that you're talking about, that's Viscerelli's property.
Yeah, I couldn't remember that.
If we can negotiate with Mr. Viscerelli to say, can we landscape on the outside of your fence, down to the mosque road? I mean, I've known him for 45. I knew him when I grew up in the neighborhood with his kids. I used to work on that farm. I'd throw bales of hay with his kids to feed the pigs. So, I think he'd be reasonable enough to work out something with the city that on the south side of the fence we could landscape it somehow. So I think we at least ought to explore that possibility so that the street coming in looks reasonable all the way from 7th West to at least 1075 West. At least make it look reasonable. So that would be my suggestion.
It's a good suggestion, one we'll pursue.
I just wanted to chime in and say we literally just discussed which was better looking, weeds or cinder block wall. guys, we got to think bigger. We got to think nicer. We got to raise our standards just a little bit. If we're talking about, well, the weeds are gone, cinder block walls going in.
Well, it's just.
I want to face palm like
I've
I've never face palmed before. You know what I mean? We just got to think higher. We just got to think bigger as a city, as a council, as when it comes to allocating money for things like this. There's times to penny pinch. There's times to splurge, and I think this is one of those.
Okay, so where are you going to come up with the $1.3 million to change to a lower quality fence?
No,
Is that what you're saying?
No, not necessarily. I want to go higher quality. Maybe $1.3 million isn't enough. That's what I'm saying. Is we got to think bigger. We got to think.
But UDOT's only going to put the CMU fence in. What you want us to do is rip out the CMU fence and put in a higher quality fence there?
And remember, it has to be approved by UDOT.
Right. Well, yeah, I'm sure they'll say, no, you must put in cinder block. That'll make us all look really good.
We're making lemonade with lemons. That's some pricey sugar. And how much sugar do we want to throw in there? I'd be curious on landscaping. I'd almost like to see how much we can cover how much of that wall we can cover with greenery and landscaping. So it's not an issue, but
I think we would look for some sort of drought tolerant program and plan. It wouldn't be all greenery. I think if we don't do that,
greenery, Russian olive.
Yeah, I think if we're not water conscious and water wise, then we face criticism from another group of stakeholders in the community. So I think what our intent would be to provide an attractive gateway to the city that is water wise and that sends a good message, a good welcoming message to individuals that come into our community.
Well, I want to make sure. I'm going to use another example over by farther south, but we've got that burn problem, and we've talked about fixing the north side of the road coming into the city, but on the south side of 70th South, we have a problem where it's not very pretty, and I talked to Isaac one day because I drove past and the parts guys, the maintenance, the facilities guys are knocking down weeds on that, the side of that berm, and they're using hand lawnmowers. And I drove there and I came back, and 2 hours later, they're still mowing that berm with hand lawnmowers. And we talked about, is there a better way of doing that? And so whatever we do, if we're going to landscape this, it's got to be nice looking, low maintenance, water wise, but particularly low maintenance. We can't do something like we have on 70th South that takes 3 and 4 hours to knock down the weeds because the slope is so steep. And we've got to be super conscious about that, because that entrance over there is, for our maintenance guys, is ridiculous to maintain.
And if I may too, I think what would be a good idea too is developing a consistent standard that we could apply across the city, so that what we do at 90th South is consistent with what we do in the future, because we have had conversations about the future of 70th South, what we may need to do, for example, in the future along other corridors that require or that we are interested in doing this type of improvement, that we have some consistency there.
Well, and we as the RDA allocated some money for that gateway over on 70th. So what we need to do is, as we're looking for that design on the gateway at the 70th, we need to look at the gateway on 90th and make it consistent with that. And so now's the time to bring those into line. And then if we get some, I know extra money is a contradiction in terms, but if we can find some money, then we can fix the south side of 70th the same way, and we can look at maybe the gateways coming in at U111 on both ends, and 78 South we need to look at. That's got a different set of issues with the bridge, but what I'm suggesting is, let's not do this in a vacuum. Let's make this holistic with 70th. Let's make it 90th. And you're right, if we have some reasonably consistent plans, then we can incorporate those in other places in the city.
Yeah, that is distinctly West Jordan, similar to what, for example, they've done in St. George with their freeway interchanges and some of their kind of places where transportation routes come together. There's a consistent look. I'm not suggesting we do what St. George is doing, but you clearly get a flavor for the community as you exit the freeway along those interchanges.
So before I come back to ask if there's like a clear yes, no question you'd like to ask of the council to wrap this up, we'll go to Mayor Burton.
That's exactly where I was going to go. So the question is, do you want us to A, do what is shown on the screen right now, which is what Brian discussed in the first place. UDOT will put in their walls. We clean up the existing wall. We put in our wall in the green section and move forward that way. Or B, put in the wall that Brian was talking about that matches UDOT all the way across. C, put in a totally different wall, perhaps a wall that matches the precast that's already there, and replace all the rest of it that goes like that. Or D, do all the rest of the walls out there. So we just need to know which way you want us to go. Right now, don't give us any direction. What you see on the screen is, I should just replace that. If you don't get us in a new direction, what we will do is replace the existing wall because of the way we had it last with the council and make it all match what UDOT puts in there. And I got the feeling that's not what we want to do.
When it comes to funding any of those options, the request for council action, the fiscal note noted the additional landscape, 350 for that, and then the 150 for updating what's out there. It didn't talk about creation or building any or installing any additional walls. Was that?
That's correct.
Is that included in there, or would that be an additional cost on top of the 500 grand that's already been allocated?
Yes, that would be additional costs.
Okay. And
we could do this without additional costs that he's had shown to you.
It still has that 100 feet of CMU if city install 4 foot, the green section. Yeah.
Right.
So the funding for that green section isn't included in the funding that's already been allocated, right?
It is included.
It will be.
Okay.
And that's a short stretch. So,
okay.
But again, I don't know where the pricing is going to be with different things with this. Really, it's
that's dependent on if the resident is willing to do that anyway.
Correct.
If they want to keep their wood picket fence there, they can keep their wood picket fence there.
Correct. The one good thing with the CMU wall that UDOT is putting in is it is getting rid of some of the dilapidated old vinyl fencing and wood fencing that's in place up by 13th West. I mean,
all right.
Anyway,
so there were 4 options, Mayor, that you threw out. Conversation seemed that the council favored doing what was proposed here with the addition of checking to see what other options we may have to provide some visual consistency.
And set standards.
That.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm not going to get in the middle of that.
All right. So are there 4 that want to proceed with what was outlined in the request for council action?
Isn't that a vote?
It is a vote. Yeah. I mean, if you'd like to make a motion, go for it.
No, because you don't like motions because you don't think we should follow Robert's Rules of Order. So you do it however you want.
I'm fine with the motion. There was no second. I just wanted to move the meeting on. And even though nobody voiced support for the motion, it seemed like they were in favor. So if someone would like to make a motion, I'd be open to it. If someone would like to just raise hands and say, yes, please bring this back, or please proceed.
Okay, I'll make a motion. I will move that we use what has been presented in our packet as our starting point. But in addition to that, we want to know what type of a stain with a sealant, and we want whatever is put in for landscaping, we want it to be consistent with the other entryways of our city.
I'll second
Okay, any discussion to the motion? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, motion carries with one in opposition.
Thank you.
Okay. Is that the only transportation element we're discussing today?
That's correct. There were a number of other kind of transportation updates in an email you should have received. Just a couple other notes and update on City Hall remodel was sent via email as well. So there's a few other items there to update you, but that's all we have for this evening.
All right. There are no administrative items tonight, which brings us to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Whitelock, second by Councilmember Green. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. We stand adjourned.